Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you. We'd like to open this third day of the conference with the head of the Military Intelligence Directorate of the IDF. For those coming from overseas, this is the national assessor of Israel's government and the state of Israel in terms of the security risks that Israel is facing. And Aharon, I'm really delighted and honored to have you here. A few words about the commander of the Military Intelligence Directorate, his history, his biography and background. First and foremost, he is a Major General in the IDF. He joined the army in 1986, and again, if you don't know what that means, in the IDF, if you wear red shoes, it means you are a paratrooper, so he indeed joined the paratroopers. And among the many positions he filled in the IDF, he was the commander of the officers' school, he was the commander of the paratroopers brigade, he was the commander of the fire division, he was head of logistics, he was head of operations in the IDF, and now, as we've said, commander of the Military Intelligence Directorate. Major General Aharon Haliva has a BA in Social Sciences from Bar-Ilan and an MA from Haifa University, and we hope he does his doctorate here. And he said amen. So thank you, Aharon, for joining us. Over the next 30 minutes in our conversation, I would like to try and review all the arenas that Israel is grappling with and that are within our national assessment, the one that, as we've said, Aharon is in charge of. And we'll begin with the northern arena. We have had some very interesting discussions about Hezbollah. The head of Mossad yesterday talked about the tight connection and ties between Hezbollah and Iran, and I'd like to hear your assessment. First of all, we are now about 40 years after the establishment of Hezbollah. Looking at today's snapshot, taking into account the history of this organization, is Hezbollah more an Iranian proxy organization? That is an organization that actively promotes and implements Iranian interests, an organization that on D-Day will do what the Iranians want them to do, even if it contradicts their own interests? Or is it a more authentic Lebanese organization and the interests of the Shiites and perhaps the Lebanese in general, or the Lebanese government, is of greater value when it comes to this tension? Good morning. First of all, it is my honor and my delight. In all the bio that you mentioned, I was just insulted that you said I was a paratrooper, because if you're a paratrooper, you're always a paratrooper for life. So I wanted to mention that. And as for your question, Hezbollah is an organization that has three hats. It is the protector of the Shiites, it is an Iranian proxy, and it is trained by the Iranians. It is also the protector of Lebanon. And we must say out loud, perhaps the obvious, Hezbollah is an organization that has actually holding the country captive. When I look at the Abraham Accords, I ask myself, if Hezbollah hadn't taken over Lebanon, would Lebanon have joined the Abraham Accords? I'm sure it would have. And this question and this debate, whether is Hezbollah is more this or more that, I think that is futile, because it's all a matter of the connection between Hezbollah's leader, Nasrallah, and the leader in Iran, and the context of the event in question. So I believe that within this regional development, Nasrallah is kind of doing his own math. He has very strong, long memory. He remembers the events of the Second Lebanon War and what's happened since then. And that's how he manages and kind of juggles between those hats. So you could ask, how is Nasrallah working vis-a-vis the Iranian proxy? There are answers to these questions. I think that Soleimani's assassination by the United States meant that Nasrallah is not rushing to be an Iranian proxy anymore. You can see his conduct now vis-a-vis the matter of gas and his wanting to kind of ride the wave and saying, I'm a protector of Lebanon. And of course, Nasrallah is very much concerned and very worried about the Shiites in Lebanon. And so with our Israeli interest in mind. We must always look at the context and do what's right and for the Israeli security interest. So what you're saying is that the answer to my question is it depends on the event, it's a per case issue. And so let's attach it to a certain scenario. Let's say that for some reason the Iranian Ayatollahs come and say to Hezbollah, my dear friend, we have given you money, we have given you weapons, and so on and so forth. It is now time to take revenge. Please press the button and wage war against Israel for whatever reason. Well, there's only one small problem with your question. Nasrallah is part of those Ayatollahs. He is considered very highly. He's in Iran. I believe it would take time, if ever, for Iran to give Nasrallah such a direct order. First of all, they would ask his opinion in the general context of the way they want to operate him. They want to activate him. They might say, we have invested in you, but it's not a kind of, patriarchal kind of demand. It's more of an advice-seeking procedure. And I would assume, and the IDF assumes, that it is likely that under certain circumstances, Nasrallah and Hezbollah will join the violence, the circle of violence, because of their support, and Iran's support of them. Let me ask you the other question then, not whether they will join the circle of violence, but whether in certain constellation and against the backdrop of the tension with the Karish rig and the EEZ, is there any situation where Hezbollah perhaps would want to wage war, initiate it? Well, we told decision makers that there is potential for escalation in the northern arena as a result of the fact that we have yet to reach an agreement on the EEZ, and that certainly is taken into account. It is certainly my role to be the one to alert in this area, and I think that at this point we have more in common than we have in differences. We have more similarities than differences, and I hope for Nasrallah that he isn't underestimating Israel's reaction to his actions. I must remind you that we intercepted his drones, which he launched toward the rig, and there was no response. And I want to remind everyone, and Nasrallah among them, that Israel's might and strength is very big and great, and I don't think it should be tested. And I think that Nasrallah, over the last 10 years or so, estimates very well Israel's intelligence and Israel's firing capabilities, and he has seen, Nasrallah has seen what we have done in recent years, and he knows what I'm talking about. And if he were to make a mistake in this kind of considerations that you're asking of him, and God forbid there will be a deterioration, and according to his ultimatums it could even happen in the next few days, I would assume that the result or the outcome of such a mistake would be devastating for the Israeli home front, but moreover, and more than that, for the Lebanese home front. Do you have a message that you would like to convey to the Lebanese government or people? I don't need to convey messages to anyone in Lebanon. The Lebanese people wake up in the morning, they turn on the electricity, and they don't have power. And the value of their currency is terrible, very low. Lebanon, like all countries funded by Iran, like Iraq, like Yemen, like Syria, are countries that are at the very bottom of any world parameter. They are failed countries, and all Lebanese citizens, including the Shiites, that ostensibly should be financed and should be helped by Iran and Hezbollah, don't need to hear my messages. And that's why I think that a Lebanese gas rig is an Israeli interest. First of all, we need to produce gas for ourselves, but improving Lebanon's financial situation is an Israeli interest. And you also want, of course, to disconnect them from the Iranian funds. I think Iran will continue to provide them hundreds of millions of dollars either way. That's not the point. I think that we should all, in a conference like this one, ask questions about future trends. And we're living in a very complex world. We have a climate crisis impending. According to experts, the pace is much faster than we perhaps believe. It's also a function of what's happening in Ukraine, and not only that, energy reality. To read that the recession in Europe is because electricity is not being generated and factories are actually being closed down, or the scope is being reduced. There's a water crisis in many countries around us. There is a produce crisis. I listened to the address of the Egyptian president last week. He talked about prices. He talks about the campaign he is doing in order to get resources and to strengthen his country. And this country is very important, Egypt, for Israel. We are in a reality where the Lebanese and other people and nations around us understand the price of war, because the world should grapple with other challenges, other daily challenges: food, water, energy, climate. That's what we should be grappling with, because that could serve radicalization to grow, and we should really invest our efforts there in the next 5-10 years. And that's why Israel is such a valuable state, because it can be of support to its neighbors. Agreements on energy, water, food technology, food tech, that really strengthens Israel's valuableness, and that's what brought the Abraham Accords about. That's what's going to help in the future, and that's what we should be focusing on. That can help us win Iran and its terror. Besides the fact that you should also use force with strategic thought behind it, because sometimes the use of force helps. When I look at the use of force as we did in Guardian of the Walls, we didn't want to go into that round. It was forced upon us. And the use of force in Operation Breaking Dawn just a month ago. And I also look at the use of force in the Middle East with very precise intelligence. And of course, intelligence and capabilities here are really essential, and also the ability to take action against our adversaries without harming those who are innocent. That creates deterrence, and add to that Israel's involvement in shaping the civilians' lives around us. That could help Israel continue to grow in the important aspects of economics, health, transportation, education. That's where we're headed. When I look at everything, and when I look at things through, in my role, I only look through one prism, through one lens. What is Israel's strategic national interest to ensure that Israel continues to grow and prosper? So let's leave Hezbollah for a little while, and let's talk about the one who has established it and uses it as a puppet, and I'm talking about Iran, of course. Yesterday we had the head of Mossad here, and he conveyed two messages that we, as terror experts, find very interesting. First of all, he said, I estimate that this phenomenon of state terrorism, which never actually disappeared, but we had different organizational terror and other versions, states supporting terrorism. It's not the same as it used to be with Syria and Libya in the 1970s. Pay attention. Certainly if the nuclear agreement will be signed and those huge budgets will be given to Iran, this phenomenon may return very strongly. And the second thing he said is pay further attention to the potential connection between elements from Al-Qaeda who have fled from Afghanistan and are now living in Iran, who may assume a more central position following the assassination of al-Zawahiri. And now Iran will have yet another avenue. So what do you think? Terrorism was, terrorism is, and terrorism will be. We are living in a world where there are many conflicts. We are living in a world where religions and different faiths bring people to take drastic action, extreme action, because they believe it's the right thing to do. And if anyone thinks that someday we will be living in a world without terrorism, which is a way of just expressing your desire and achieving your goals, then you're wrong. We're going to continue to see terrorism. We're all living in a world where many conflicts haven't been resolved. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is here, and some of the terrorism that the IDF has to grapple with day in, day out, coming in from the West Bank and other places, comes from there. And the Islamist terrorism that you spoke about, speaking of ISIS or Al-Qaeda, it's there. These extreme Islamic views are still around. They have not gone anywhere. They're changing form, they're transforming, they are changing in terms of organization, but they're here to stay. Iran is spreading terrorism. They are able to also proliferate weapons. It's not just moving drones from one place to another, from Iran to Russia for the war in Ukraine, but it's also for the militia in Iraq and for the militia in Syria and Yemen, and this reality is not going to change. We have to fight it. But we have to know that it's here, it's present, and I can't see any situation where my successor, even in 3 generations or 4 generations, will sit here and there'll be no terrorism in his life. We have to fight this phenomenon. I think that what I talked about earlier, working with nations, working with populations, because what am I saying? Part of these civilian phenomena that are happening are creating considerable potential for radicalization and for terrorism, because we as the world do not address many of the components of these lives, because terrorism usually grows among the young who are despaired, who are looking for new hope, and we are the ones who should be creating that hope. The Military Intelligence Directorate is not only talking about threats, we also have to point out the opportunities, and these opportunities are out there, they're important. And as part of this conference, and alongside this conference, we're also having an innovation conference in the IDF. We have guests coming from overseas, but also from the region. And the collaborations are not only confined to security, because even our closest neighbors with whom we have long-standing peace are worried about the stability of their regimes. And why? Not because they're in conflict with neighboring countries, but because of the daily reality, because of work and other things I've mentioned.
Last question regarding Iran, and let's go from the terror threat to the conventional threat. Yesterday, the Iranians published the fact that they're preparing a new surprise to the state of Israel, a new UAV which could reach Tel Aviv and Haifa. What is your estimation regarding the multiplier of Israel vis-a-vis the conventional threats that are coming from Iran itself, not via proxies necessarily? Well, the intelligence corps and the rest of our community, and you mentioned the heads of Mossad and Shabak, our cooperation is exceptional. But you're not from their team in the elite unit of Sayeret Matkal. Yes, but I have my red shoes of paratroopers. That's good enough. The best cooperation I have seen yet. I was head of operations at our operation of Protective Edge, and I can tell you that we are cooperating in an excellent sense, not saying that we agree on everything, but rather we are doing together activities, operations, and exceptional connections in order to promote Israel's security interest. In this respect, looking at the Iranian, our job is to provide intelligence on a national level, strategic level, operative level, and in order for decision makers in Israel, for which we work, to be able to make the proper decisions for the security of the state of Israel. This is what we do, and I think that the intelligence that we provide is not bad at all. Also regarding Iran, and our answer is not only intelligence but also operational. We know exactly what's going on. Iran is a hub of terrorism. We are preparing ourselves with operation plans, with various alternatives that we present to the political echelon so that they have the best decisions. So I'd like to go to the next arena, talking about the southern arena. We have the special emissary of the UN to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We have been through another short operation just recently. But all in all, looking at the past year, it has been quite stable. We've had quiet in the south, quiet in Gaza itself. Do you think that this is how things would carry on? Are we headed towards stability and understanding between the sides, that those fire are not really leading to anywhere. Well, I said publicly, I was head of operations, and I said that I expect the quiet right after Guardian of the Walls operations to continue for 5 years. And despite breaking down operation, I'm still standing behind this statement, not with a grain of salt, although this is my role to always doubt something, to always look for the other way. But in Gaza, I do identify that alongside the deterrence against Hamas processes that are led by Israel with the assistance of the ambassador and others for economic stability, for allowing people to work in Israel, this holds a potential for a long era of quiet for many years. Is this why Hamas did not join this operation? Well, I think it has to do with many considerations. It has to do with what is happening in Gaza, their internal issues. Everything is not only Hamas vis-a-vis Israel. We have other players like the Egyptians. We have the Hamas internal issues. We have issues of they have issues of governance in Gaza. I think that in this context, I think that we should not just be very complacent and say that, well, Hamas did not join in. If Hamas believes that it's the sovereign in Gaza, it should have done and acted inside Gaza. We have operated, we have exercised the Israeli power, and I'm very happy that the intelligence was, as it was in the very short operation. I believe the message was quite understood by all the players. President Sisi and others are very worthy players to security and to a quiet in the southern area. We have to understand the Egyptian role there. All of that, I'm hopeful that together with the economic steps that we're taking in Gaza, and I hope that we'll see some progress even going further, this will continue accompanying Gaza. There is no reason for a clash between Hamas and Israel in this point in time. But I'd like to add another thing. The question regarding Gaza is a complicated one because I look at the Palestinian arena as one thing. It's true that there is a separation between Gaza and Judea and Samaria, but only asking about Gaza without looking at Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, well, the moderator says this is the next question. There is a question. I want to remind you the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is present. We're managing it. It is evoking its complexities, terrorism, and the national Palestinian point of view is here, it's present, it did not go. People who put on the agenda the despair of Palestinians from the conflict and going towards one state, I'm not there. I understand why people are dealing with it, but we are definitely identifying it in Judea and Samaria. We see a rise in shooting attacks. We know that head of Palestinian Authority, as every man, as somebody told me coming here, I'm not getting older, I'm just maturing. Well, he's also maturing. There is complexity. Things will be different perhaps when the days of Abu Mazen are finished. We have to look at Hamas, we have to look at the entire region and see how do we work against terrorism and supply security. There were meaningful events between March and May. We are thwarting terrorist attacks every single day and night with our activity of the IDF and Shabak. And within this accuracy, there are many steps that need to be taken, strengthening the moderates, fighting terrorism, and allow those who can do it to promote long-term, well-based solutions. Okay, so now we are shifting from the southern arena towards the center, and I'd like to stay there for a second. We heard the Chief of Staff saying recently that he is frustrated to an extent from the lack of governance of Abu Mazen and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, particularly in the northern area. This necessitates the IDF to go in order to protect the citizens of Israel. You did mention the fact that we remember the times of this lack of governance. This was just recently. What is your estimation? Are we going towards a deterioration of security, coming to the Jewish high holidays, etc.? Well, the high holidays, the Jewish high holidays, this is always a sensitive period of time. There is potential for security events, but it's always true. It's a very general statement. That's not the important thing. The important thing is to look at long-term portions. I'm looking at the reality, a security reality, a regional reality at the day after Abu Mazen, and it's already here because we do see struggles happening already, struggles of control. There are all sorts of acts of the Hamas directing the way, money coming for weapons. I understand that the head of Shabak discussed this. So my working assumption is that there is a possibility for escalation. However, this is not something that we're doomed to have, because I know my commander quite well. I don't think the chief of staff is frustrated. He is a professional. He's pinpointing phenomenon, and he is marking the right way to go in order to curb it. Vis-a-vis the internal Palestinian terrorism, this is a Palestinian interest. They're not working for the state of Israel. They're working for the Palestinian interest. And the Palestinian interest is to lower the level of terrorism there in order to have a stable government. And this coexists with the Israeli interest as well. I'm very happy if we don't need to apprehend each and every night dozens of potential terrorists, Palestinian terrorists. Within this, we have to do the right activity on the Israeli level, the national level, in order to stabilize the Palestinian Authority. This is our interest.
Before we conclude, two final questions. The first is I'd like to zoom out for a moment from Israel. This is an international conference. We have with us guests from across the universe. And I'd like to ask you, when you look at the global system and you identify the change from a one-polar, unipolar system, hegemony, that could dictate processes, including in warfare and elsewhere, to a system that is not only multipolar, where there are at least three competing poles, Russia, China, and the United States, but it even contradicts in terms of its agenda and interests, and we also see it against the backdrop of the Ukrainian war and other backdrops. What could be the implications of this shift on the Middle East and even Israel's security? Look, the Middle East is, for the last 12 or even 24 months, in constant shifts and constant changes that stem from various reasons. If I had to give them a title, I would say everyone's talking to everyone, because the system is undergoing change. And obviously, the war that's now happening in Europe further hones the differences or the ideology differential between the different countries, but certainly the world is in competition, what one would call the great power competition between the United States and China, and it already has implications on the Middle East. That's clear. When the war began last February, I was asked in many places, whose side are you on? The Russian side, the Ukrainian side? What's your position? And I said, I'm not on anyone's side. I'm on the United States side. Israel's relations with the United States are perhaps its greatest asset. And it's very important that we don't forget it. We're independent, we say what we think, we use force according to our own Israeli interests, but we must always remember that even if the United States were to take a step back from the Middle East and perhaps go towards the Pacific more, the United States is still the most important strategic ally Israel has, and really has no replacement. And even if the world is reshaping, I must ask myself, which kind of world do I want my children to grow up in? And what is the ideological basis? What is the meaning of democracy? What is the meaning of liberty? What is the meaning of leading values? Contemporary reality creates not blocks, I would say, in terms of like the Cold War kind of blocks, but we are seeing a world coming to be where there are similar ideologies, but many of the actors are still asking themselves who they should go with, whose side they should be on. And when you add to that the other components I talked about, for instance, the prices of energy, gas, the black gold, Israel should really keep bolstering its valuableness so that as many actors as possible will, at the end of the process, decide to be on Israel's side. And the Abraham Accords are a huge sort of springboard in that respect. And in the great power competition in the region, in the Israel-Iran competition, which is also ideological, you have to build yourself powerful capabilities that is not just a military capability. Because the military capability is obvious, the gap between us and our enemies is growing, and we shouldn't feel ashamed of our military might. But power has its limits, and we must base it on other things as well. And here is a good opportunity to identify goals and to go ahead. And I'm looking at the Iranian entrenchment in Syria and Soleimani's vision. Both of them are dead, both Soleimani and the vision. And we have managed to stop this dream from coming true, and on a practical level, from having these weapons transferred from one place to another. Okay, great. But now what? What's the future about? How do we get Syria out of this radical axis that connects Iran to Hezbollah? So I would say we should look at the entire region and bolster Israel's valuableness. Thank you very much. Final question, with your permission. You are here in this distinguished conference. It's an academic conference at Reichman University, the ICT, and you had an assessment system, perhaps the largest assessment system in Israel, maybe one of the largest in the world, with hundreds of officers and soldiers who are great experts in their field, and heading this national assessment system. How do you view the interaction, or what is the role of the academic world in contributing to strategic geopolitical thinking in Israel? Look, I have a lot of confidence, but for the first time in my life, I'm in a position where I wake up in the morning, if I even slept at night, and my stomach is turning. And why? Because I keep asking myself, what don't you know? What are you not assessing correctly? What are you missing? Ultimately, it's the future of our children. And that's why I constantly ask myself, outside of this really excellent system we have, and in the Intelligence Directorate, there are amazing people. There are people who are doing such amazing work in every field. And I think that they provide the Israelis with great security and safety. But I can't rest on the laurels of what they provide. I keep having to ask myself about future risks and challenges. And that's why I think the academic world and all other organizations that are outside the IDF, outside the defense establishment, sometimes we have their own way of thinking. We should be challenged by them. They should alert us. And that's why I read the ICT's documents, and I read other academic institutions' work, because they are real, genuine partners, so that they can doubt, they can do critical thinking, they could do all sorts of war games, and that's why I am so thankful for what you do. And that's why in the Intelligence Directorate we also have a center where civilians are working, because even in the war between Russia and Ukraine, we don't invest a lot of resources in it. But the academic world have given us so much, and the IDF has learned so much from that, and that is worth a lot. And I am really grateful and thankful to the experts and academics, because they contribute greatly to Israel's security without even knowing it. Major General Aharon Haliva, Commander of the Military Intelligence Directorate in the IDF, thank you so much for this fascinating interview and for the time you've spent with us. Thank you.